Welcome to the B-Sides and Beers podcast.
Hello, welcome to B-Sides and Beers podcast episode 3. Today we're looking at No Means No and focusing on their live album, Live and Cuddly. How's it going tonight, boys?
Excellent.
Good. Cool. Let's start this off as we usually do. What are we drinking this evening?
I'm drinking a Roche Dutch Pils.
Cool.
I switch it back over to the Pink Whitney until I run out. So I'm back on the
Pink Whitney.
Pink Whitney.
Well, that's okay. I'll somewhat be matching you tonight. The can that I have is pink, and the beer is called Jerkface 9000 with the most pissed off, crazy clown.
Looks like a White Zombie album cover art, doesn't it?
Yeah, white zombie meets Prodigy.
Yeah, it kind of looks like
A little bit of fire, little bit of fire starter. Yeah, Keith. Yeah, so it's a Northwest Wheat.
Northwest Wheat.
So that's what I got.
Oh,
I'll let you know what it's like. It's the first time I've had it. I'm just kind of grabbing new shit as I go. So
I like those Parallel 49
Ooh,
beers.
nice.
Actually, I've had a couple of them, and they're good.
that is a super wheat beer. Okay, there we go.
wow.
So that's what we got there. All right, so tonight we are talking about No Means No.
No Means No.
No Means No. They are a punk band from Victoria, BC, Canada. They've been around since 77? Something like that.
Long fucking time.
Yeah, their debut album came out in 82. I think they formed in 78, 79. It's basically two brothers. And
John and Rob Wright.
there you go. So there's John and Rob, right? Yeah. And here we go. So I'm going to shoot this off to Dane and ask what made you choose this album?
Okay, I think this is one of those albums that, again, we talked about this in a previous podcast about albums that sort of just like, we were talking about albums that came out in 1987. Obviously, all four of us were thinking Appetite for Destruction.
Yep.
Just one of those albums that, like, as a young kid, you're exposed to something which is just like life-changing. And like, for me, I was interested in different kinds of music, mostly because I had cousins that were older than me. I had a couple uncles that were quite young and a little bit older than me, and took it upon themselves to show me all of like the music that my parents would hate.
Right.
So my uncle Dave got me into No Means No, and obviously of Victoria fame, and one of the, I would say, original punk rock bands coming out of Canada.
Definitely.
Next to the almighty DOA.
Yep.
But it was just this album. It was so raw and so good. And specifically this one song, Rags and Bones.
Oh, yes.
And just like a bass lick that just, just cut through everything. And like, that was sort of what No Means No was all about, right?
Definitely.
Like, very bass focused. And then backed up by John Wright's, sort of jazz style drumming.
Very proggy.
And just like that was it. That was the beginning of prog right there. I mean, they are, I'm sure, the inspiration to a lot of like really crazy math rock bands. And, that was something that was, I was a little bit into in the early 2000s, but
Right.
No Means No was just this sort of bass focused, super heavy, something I'd never heard before.
Right.
And this live album was just, I think, the best way to sort of frame that sound.
Was this the first album you heard of theirs, or was there something that you heard prior to?
This was the first album.
Okay. And this was 91? Yeah, 91.
When I heard it, oh man, I was just a little guy. You know what? It was probably around 93, 94 when I heard it.
Okay.
And this album is, a lot of the tracks are off their album Wrong, which came out in, I want to say 1990?
89. And that was the first album
89.
I ever heard of theirs too, was Wrong. So
yeah. And I think that's probably one of their most popular albums.
definitely.
Yeah, it's just hard hitting and like, different and, just like post-hardcore quintessential Canadian punk rock. And like, yeah, it's one of those albums that a lot of people have never really heard before.
Right.
And I just remember having it as a kid. And especially like, I think I was junior high when I was listening to it. And a lot of my friends thought it was satanic. And I think because that first song,
Yep.
And I don't know who screams it out. I don't know if it's Robert John, and they're like, "The dead lives."
Yep.
And
I
like,
love
bow,
that.
Bow,
Yep.
bow, bow,
Yep.
bow, bow. And it's just like, it was something that you did not hear on the radio.
Yeah.
It was just something completely different.
Well, it was so tight and so perfect and so, unradio friendly. I mean, even for myself, it was very difficult to get into them at that time. Like I had heard Wrong, and I got instantly, like you said, hooked on the bass and the tightness of the drums and that the solid guitar riffs, like the very precise math kind of deal. But it was hard for me at the time because it would have been 93, 94, I guess, when I was starting to discover punk. And it was too much for my brain at the time. I mean, for the most part, I was all about Fat Records and Epitaph and
yeah,
and
exactly.
it was all
Yeah,
90s
the second
skate.
wave.
It was all 90s skate punk for me. And then when I heard NoMeansNo, I got it, but I was not in the right headspace to really take it. So
yeah, and it's easy to chalk it up as like, oh, that's bullshit. That doesn't sound right.
well, you're just into different things. That's the deal. I mean, when you look at the skate punk at the time, it was very stripped down, very fast,
very formulated,
very simple, but it was so kick ass. And then you look at this where it's it's almost like a super technical Melvins, or you can see the Rush influence and the over the top proggy everything in it. So it was a little hard to digest at the time, but now it's great.
Yeah. And so there was like that first impression it had of me as a kid. And then like, I got a little older and in my 20s, like going to see them live, and these dudes were old, and like I think that was like part of the attraction.
Oh, totally.
You see these grandpas go up on stage, and then you look around you, and it's just like there's people wearing hockey masks, obviously. Because they had an an alter ego band called the Hanson Brothers,
which I'll get into in a little bit later on this because I've got some cool info on that. But yeah,
there you go. So like, you would go to the live shows, and it would just be like crazy fucking people there. And I remember seeing, I'm trying to remember where it was. I mean, I saw them a couple of times, and like, to be honest with you, I've even walked out of a NoMeansNo show because it was shitty. And that's just punk rock for you, right? I mean, sometimes it's good and sometimes it's bad. It's just like, that's what it is. It is what it is. But, Edmonton band Broken Nose, you would see like Al there, and, you would just see people from like the Edmonton sort of punk rock scene come to these shows, and everyone was just there having a great time to see these guys. And like, it was sort of like, you belong to like this club, right? Like if you knew who No Means No was, then that was cool.
Yeah, definitely.
And that's just one of the things that really kind of stuck with me with this band. And, obviously I got, into punk rock and, more towards like the Fat Records sort of avenue that you talked about, and, loved it for years and years and years. But really like my love for punk rock started with, I remember me and Mike would laugh at Joey Shithead and DOA and like, what the fuck is this?
Yep.
We'd see it on Much Music and like, this is fucking garbage.
Yeah.
But then like I heard No Means No and I was like, wait a second, this is awesome. And they're Canadian, and they're different. And that guy's holding his drumstick differently. And it's like, all I hear is like this heavy bass, and that's different. And it was just sort of like, a real nice introduction into what music could be.
Was that one of the triggering points for you wanting to play bass, or was it just like I can see when we talk about No Means No and when we talk about Fu Manchu and stuff like that, where I could see you being drawn to that specific flow of bass. Like I could see that standing out to you. Is that something that triggered something in you, or were you?
Yeah, it was like a perfect storm.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was always, even now, but I've always been obsessed with tone.
Yep.
And like that perfect tone.
Yep.
That tone that just puts goosebumps on your arm.
Yeah.
And No Means No wasn't necessarily that. It was, it was basically my uncle who was in his own band back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
And he gave me, my first guitar, and he's like, this is the bass and it's fucking awesome. And here's a band to listen to. They're called No Means No. And like, they hit the bass so fucking hard. And I didn't really understand what he was talking about. I was like, oh, okay.
Yep.
I mean, sure. And then you listen to it and it's just like, wow. And like that song, I mentioned before, Rags and Bones, I spent weeks trying to like learn that lick.
Right.
It's just like such an awesome lick. And I eventually like figured it out. And I think that as far as like me learning the bass, I progressed from that clever little like Rags and Bones lick. It was just like always with me when we were like writing songs back in the day. And like, yeah. So yeah, it was like super, it just sort of like, it kind of just went into my subconscious, and it's always kind of been there.
Very cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's funny you were mentioning the them being so old. I keep going back to the album cover of theirs for The People's Choice, where they're somewhere in Europe and someone has written on the green room wall or the stairway wall, it says, how fucking old are No Means No ? And then it says, give it up, granddads. And underneath.
Yeah, give it up, granddads.
Yeah, and,
I love that.
And right underneath, you got John writing, that's great granddads to you, fucker. I love that.
Yeah, so dope.
It's so good. It's like, yes, we're old, but we're still doing this, and we're still better than you. And even if it sucks, we're still having a blast, and you still paid us to come see the show. So what the hell?
Right. Yeah. And that's what made it punk rock,
Yeah,
right?
definitely.
That's what made it punk
Love
rock.
it.
Yeah.
I know this album only because of you. Because I didn't know it back when it came out, and when you started listening to it is when I started listening to it. And the funny thing is that like I don't think I've got a live album on my top 10. So that was number one for me. I was like, oh, he's picking a live album. Interesting, because
Yeah, that was yeah.
because I'm never a fan of live albums. Like I thought they were cooler back when I was a kid, and now I'm like, I can't listen to a live album. However, this is a different live album. This is like in a club kind of a live album rather than playing Wembley and getting everybody to sing along with you, right? Like, I think the one of my favorite things about this album, again, is that first track. But
Yep.
I think that you guys would probably agree that every single live album you've ever heard starts with what? Faded in crowd chanting and singing, right?
Yep.
This is right in. Like, right
And
in.
go.
There is
Yeah.
no woo, woo, yeah. Like, it's just
Yeah.
smacks you right in the mouth right off the bat. And I love that part about it.
Yeah.
And you know, we were talking about Per Blunt and the Smalls in the last episode, and there's a lot of that in there too. Like, or vice versa. There's a lot of NoMeansNo in the Smalls, which, you know, then they're probably not too far off as far as when they came out. Like, the Smalls probably a few years after that, but there's a lot of that
definitely.
in there too, right? Like, that sound, like guitar sound, that bass sound definitely is in there, like all that small stuff. So, yeah, and it's funny too. Like, all of these bands so far that we've been talking about through all these episodes have been Canadian. We've talked about all these, and it hasn't even probably been intentional, and we probably haven't noticed it till right now. But it's like every single one we talk about is Canadian, so it's kind of cool that it's just like this, you know, this album that's considered one of these greatest, you know, punk rock albums and live albums to ever happen. Nobody really knows about it, and this is another thing, like on Tragically Hip, right? Like, how come nobody else knows about this? How come, you know,
Right.
why did this get missed? You know, how come somebody gets accolades when the other band that came up with it first doesn't, right? Like, there's just so many things, and you got to find out when you catch lightning in a bottle and who's your manager and who you talked to that night, and if you ran into this person, and, you know, if you drank too much and you couldn't get up the next morning, right? Like, it's like all these things that feels like that all lead to that moment of, you know, making it big. And I don't know, you know, NoMeansNo is, again, not going to be playing Wembley Stadium, but, you know, they could have been bigger in the, you know, in the realm, you know, DOA big.
They're definitely they were definitely a niche thing, and you look at the time of it too, where their first album, 82, Mama, and then you got Sex Mad in 86, and then you got Small Parts, Isolated and Destroyed in 88, and then you got Wrong in 89, and then but then you look at you look at 0 + 2 = 1 in 91. Okay, so what came out in 91 and 89? So you've got 89, you've got Bleach, and 91 you've got Nevermind. So even if, like, they were definitely there with the Melvins, and on that sort of level, a more technical side once again, but that kind of a grouping, and being in the area they were, so near to Seattle and area, those influencers are kind of just there anyway.
But like, I saw, like,
you look at,
I saw DOA.
you
like,
look at
on
all the
Much
other
Music.
bands around them. Yeah, well, DOA was a little different as well, but
Yeah, I don't know.
yeah, you just look at the explosion of bands in that vein. It's like they just got dragged under in the wake, and not to their fault. It was just a timing thing. I don't know.
I don't even know if, you know, it was even a question of are they going to blow up or not. I mean, I think it was just
Right.
within like the circles of like punk rock. I think, you know, they had done an album with Jello Biafra.
Yes.
Of you know, Dead Kennedys,
Yep.
and, you know, they were part of Alternative Tentacles and that sort of thing. And I mean, I don't know. You can take a look at bands like SNFU, you know, from Edmonton, and like, why didn't they blow up, and how come they didn't become like the next No Effects and stuff like that? And like, you know, who cares, right? Like, that's not punk rock.
Oh, totally.
It was really about, you know, I think a moment in time, and you sort of like framed it, and like, then I think like when you're talking about like 90, 91, that's sort of, I think, where they kind of got to their, you know, their height.
Yeah.
And then it sort of trailed off for a while. But I think like that was a time when you know, there was another one of those shifts, and like the hair bands were over, and it was like, okay, what now? And there was this weird moment right before grunge hit where I think people were kind of listening to punk rock a bit, and then it kind of went to grunge.
Right.
And, you know, that's where I kind of see, you know, NoMeansNo being like at their most kind of, I guess, most influential time.
Definitely.
But I don't know. And like, this is something this is going to be a segue into like why I chose this album. Is that, you know, they were also quite popular in Europe.
Oh, huge.
And, yeah. And when I listened to that album, I remember like being younger and listening to that album, and I was like, oh, that's a funny accent. It's probably in Germany somewhere or whatever. Yeah. And then I can't believe I mean, of course, like you can find this on the internet
now,
you know, now a couple of clicks and you're like, oh, and so like this was, I think the whole album was recorded in the Netherlands.
Right.
I think half of it was in Groningen and the other half was in a city called Eindhoven.
Yeah, so we got Holland and live in, I'm going to pronounce that wrong, Vera.
Oh, Vera.
Yeah.
Okay, I thought, okay. And then the other half was in Eindhoven.
Yes, Eindhoven is there. Yeah, Eindhoven is there too.
Yeah. And so I lived in Eindhoven for 3.5 years, 4 years.
Yeah, I think it was 4.
Yeah. And they recorded at a place called the FNR.
Yep.
And I've seen a bunch of bands at the FNR. I've seen the Melvins there. I've seen Sepultura there. And like, so I didn't know this up until like a couple of weeks ago. And I think that made it that much more special because, you know, we've had discussions about like why Canadian bands haven't like broken through and things like that. And like, these guys played at this show, and it's not a small club. It's a pretty big club. And this is like back in 1991, 1990. I don't know when they cut it, but
I think it was 90.
Yeah, I think, you know, that just sort of like that cinched the deal for me. I was like, oh, hell yeah, this is definitely going to be in one of my top 10 albums because like, not only have I been to the place where they recorded this in like this crazy country over in Europe, like I have all of this, you know,
a direct connection.
A direct connection, and, you know, on top of which, it was one of the first like aggressive punk bands that I really got into as a kid. So yeah, I definitely had to pick that album.
That's cool, man. I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's crazy. Neither did I. I was like, oh shit, yeah, those people in the background are Dutch. Why? Like I should have picked out that accent, but like, yeah. And I can't imagine what kind of show that must have been. It must have been.
It sounds insane.
Yeah.
I can't remember what track it was, but maybe it was Body Bag. The one where they start off the song and then he stops and he starts telling this long ass story, and he's pretending to tell a long ass story, and people are like, get on with the show. And he's kind of mocking them back. And it's like, oh yeah, this reminds you of the time. This is going to take me about another 30 minutes. And then they just kick into the song.
Yeah.
Badass. So cool.
Yeah. Right.
Love that track.
But they're just a bunch of geeks, just like any other punk band, right? That's what I love about punk rock. It's just like a bunch of geeks, you know? Yeah. You know, I think that's, you know, obviously I think they folded in 2016. It's like, how long can you, how long can you keep that thing going on?
Right.
And they did for a really long time. And, you know, again, they didn't get the accolades that a lot of other bands got, but you know, this seems to be like a theme that we keep talking about, like the underdog.
Yeah.
But, most definitely. I think they're, you know, one of the bands that, you know, you always talk about like your favorite drummer. Who does he listen to? Like, who's your favorite drummer's drummer?
Exactly.
Right. Who's your favorite bass players? And I think like a lot of bands that, you know, you think are, you know, whatever your favorites, you know, I think a lot of them did listen to NoMeansNo because they were there. Mm-hmm. They were part of that sort of initial foundation of like, you know, independent Canadian, you know, fucking punk rock or prog rock or whatever you want to call them. But like they were there.
Yeah.
And
they caught him at that same influential age.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, Live and Cuddly, check it out if you have not listened to that album.
Definitely a solid offering.
Nice.
Absolutely.
Good pick.
Yeah.
All right. Great choice, Dane. Love this album. Pretty well love everything they put out. Yeah, I guess that's it for episode 3. Thanks for listening, and cheers.